One is we do have a much hotter and drier forecast for a bulk of the growing region for the next 10 days.
Hi, once again, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. Always great to have you with us. As always, remember to like these videos, subscribe to the videos by clicking the bell icon down below, and share these videos with others as well. Well, today we have a follow-up discussion to the one that we had last Friday with Eric Relph of Comstock Investments. If you recall, when we talked on Friday last week, Eric was on his way through the Central Plains, kind of doing his own personal Western Corn Belt tour to see what's going on out there. Eric, I'm glad you're back safe and sound. You're back in the office here on a Monday. And now I can't wait to hear what you found out when you went through that area. We don't get a lot of news out of the Western Corn Belt. So what did you discover?
Yeah, and that's, being from Western Kansas, and my family farmed right up against the Nebraska-Kansas border in Decatur County, Kansas, and then in Red Willow County, Nebraska. And so that area obviously always interests me. I want to see how things are looking, and I have reasons to be out in that part of the world. So it's nice to always kind of get a look at things. But ultimately, a huge mixed bag as I left Northwest Iowa going down through central Nebraska. Things, for the most part, once I got away from the flooded regions in this area, for the most part, looked really good, especially everything in Nebraska under pivot. And then once you got south of I-80, you started having to pick through what was hailed out, what wasn't. There was a lot of hail damage here and there. And then the hail got really extensive along a big corridor in northern Kansas along Highway 36. But all in all, the corn, once you got very far south of I-80, if it wasn't under pivot, it's burn up. And you can do drive-by appraisals and know, I mean, obviously they're going to look at a field here and there, but once you know it's zero, if it looks like this, then okay, that one's zero, and it's pretty easy to figure out from there. And there's a lot of that in that region.
That's interesting because after I moved away from that area shortly after Y2K, everybody told me that they got away from grain sorghum, which was pretty prolific back then, and went in favor of the new, genetic improved hybrids of corn, dryland corn. They planted that because it was drought tolerant.
Yeah.
After I moved away, you didn't have much milo in that area anymore. So you're saying the corn couldn't handle the heat this year?
That's, yeah. So far, that was what I had seen was taking the biggest brunt of the heat, drought, that whole situation. Now, it was obvious also that they had some later rains come in because there was a lot of milo that was in pretty good shape. The heads look nice. However, it's got to finish. It's got to mature, and I don't know if it'll get there given the forecast that they've got looking ahead. But maybe the biggest surprise to me was, again, being from that area and having driven a lot of these roads many times throughout my life, the amount of soybeans was just unbelievable. I made comments numerous times to our office manager, Katie, who was on the trip with me. And she would, I think what I said surprised her. What I was seeing surprised me. And that was, there was just a ton of soybeans out there, and that's not normal.
So talk to me about what you actually found in that regard. I mean, there again, when I got out of farming, you didn't dare plant soybeans much west of Highway 81, let's say, or maybe 183 or Highway 14.
183, like yeah.
You go west of there, and then it was just too dry. We always called it semi-arid out there. But now they're actually jumping in and trying it this year.
Yeah, I think so. As I was driving along, we do crop insurance as well at Comstock, and I recalled seeing something. It wasn't pertinent to any of my clients, so I didn't pay it probably as much attention as I should have. But I recalled seeing something last year where they had changed the insurance availability for second crop soybeans, and so that all of a sudden dawned on me as I was driving along and just seeing hundreds of fields of soybeans that normally wouldn't be soybeans. I just kind of hit the brakes, pulled over, took a look, and it was all planted into wheat stubble. And obviously I didn't stop and look at every field, and you could tell by the maturity that the majority probably went in after wheat, where the fields that were quite a bit more mature were obviously planted on a normal spring schedule. So it was visibly easy to tell which was which, but there was a lot of this that was into wheat stubble. and they can draw full insurance off of that in many of these counties.
Now, you actually had the chance to take some pictures on that trip, and I wondered if you could explain what we're looking at. I saw where you had one of, it looked like either a drought-stressed or hailed-out cornfield. Where was that?
Yeah, so there were miles and miles of, and you said either, it was both. It was obviously both. They had gotten hailed out, and the drought just killed them off. And but that was stretching over a couple of different counties, between Smith and Phillips County, Kansas, along Highway 36. Uh, you're hard pressed to find a decent looking cornfield there, even the irrigated stuff, because of the hail portion. Now, obviously, the irrigated stuff isn't going to be as hit as hard by the drought situation, but man, all through there, it was terrible, and some worse than others. But we also have a video where we took of an entire mile section, and there were dozens of miles that look just like that.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, and then on the other hand, I see where you have a picture of some soybeans. Now, there again, I can't tell by looking at this particular picture. Brienne, bring that up here. I mean, the color looks good on these, but are these double crop beans? Are these spring planted beans?
Those are spring planted beans. Look real good, near 4 feet tall. And that was one of the better fields that I saw. I don't want to feel like I'm broadcasting the worst of the worst all the time. And there was definitely some good looking stuff out there, particularly on the soybeans. So like I said, it was kind of obvious that they had caught some late season rains, some timely rains after the soybeans had gone in. But I'm also going to add that once you got over into the Belleville, Kansas area, and then working north into Nebraska from there, dryland corn's already burn up, and the dryland beans are struggling right now as we speak. And without some meaningful rain very soon, those areas are going to have real problems with the beans as well.
Now, how far along are the crops from your experience driving through there?
Soybeans look, well, really, I would say the corn looks a little behind. I would say there were some planting delays, particularly in some bigger regions of Nebraska that produce well, some high production areas. I would say they were a little late in the corn. The soybeans look like they're in line with normal. So they probably went in one right after the other, where normally that region, they would take a little break between, but the soybeans are on pace with normal in Nebraska. The stuff that was double cropped in, it's pretty immature, pretty small. And that's why I think it's maybe a little more vulnerable to this weather forecast that's upcoming. And, who knows how that's going to play out. Like anything, when you get down into that region, if you're hot and dry for a couple of weeks and don't get meaningful rain following that, then you've got a problem.
Did you have a chance to talk with anyone out there about their remaining wheat harvest? Have they marketed very much of it yet, or because the price is so low, are they sitting on it?
Kind of a combination. I actually talked to one larger producer that is building a large on-farm handling facility, because he's trying to capture significantly better basis just 35 miles from where he farms versus his elevator that's 5 miles away. The other direction, they're never keeping up with the competitive bids that are in slightly different regions, just a half hour away. And so they're kind of playing it both ways. But I would say most at this point have marketed at least half of the crop, if not more, depending on where they're at and what kind of basis levels they were facing.
Well, of course, this week there is a major crop tour going on through much of the Corn Belt in the Midwest. They won't spend much time out further west like where you were, but all in all, I think most people expect them to find in the center part of the Corn Belt very good conditions, and maybe not so much on the bookends, right? Like in Ohio and on western Iowa and that northwestern part of the Corn Belt there.
Yeah, I think that's the general expectation. The worst numbers we're going to see out of the Pro Farmer Tour today and tomorrow. The South Dakota numbers, they've actually already compiled. The bean pod count was slightly higher than last year, but the corn estimate for their 10 stops in South Dakota that they make, they only clip a little corner of South Dakota, so don't take it as gospel for the whole state. But you just have to look at year over year, because it is the same route and in many cases the same fields. but they've already released that after the 10 stops in South Dakota, 152.4 on the corn versus 180.7 last year. So that would coincide with what I was seeing with some really good looking beans and more questionable corn further west and south.
Okay, let's talk about the market action then. On Monday, I was a little bit surprised to see that big of a jump in the soybean futures, even though I guess they have been extremely oversold. What do you think contributed to that?
I think it was a multitude of things. One is we do have a much hotter and drier forecast for a bulk of the growing region for the next 10 days. And I think I saw maps where we're supposed to be in the low to mid 90s in Northwest Iowa, which that's extremely hot for here. Virtually everywhere where I was over the weekend is looking at highs between 105 and 110 by the weekend this weekend. And that'll do them in. But also, we had a daily flash sale of 442,000 tons of soybeans to China and unknown destinations. And anytime you get a shot in the arm like that, especially with prices the way they've been beat up, that's gonna bolster the market a little bit. And we saw that. And continued talk about what does SAF look like moving forward. It seems like every time we get a reasonably supportive article out and that picks up any kind of traction, then that kind of bolsters the beans a little bit as well. So just kind of a multitude of things that factored in today, in addition to, like you said, being extremely oversold and having a cheap market.
Well, that goes along with what you said when we talked last week, where you said if they're going to buy soybeans, it's getting high time they get it done. It seems like maybe they're finally getting with the program here.
Yeah, and this is seasonally a time when you would see those sales. We actually should have started seeing some significant sales weeks ago, but generally speaking, this is the season. And if the U.S. is going to capture any of that Chinese business, this is when we're going to do it. And the problem, we've seen some consistent sales of late, but they just haven't been the volume that the traders have been wanting. And that's been the problem. And so even though you may see a daily flash sale of 120 or 150,000 tons, because it's not 400 or 600 or a million, the trade looks at it as almost a negative. And so the market has very little reaction.
I heard last week that because of the exchange rates, U.S. soybeans are actually cheaper now than Brazilian beans. Is that still the case?
That is the case. And that also lends some support to the argument that maybe CONAB's production number is a little more accurate than the USDA would like to admit and that many traders would like to acknowledge.
Interesting. So we had soybean sales. What happened to the corn?
Corn, I think, a combination, also oversold market, but mostly along for the ride, I think, more than anything. And I don't know that I can point to anything specific with the corn that's going to bolster those prices, other than we did see, that number from Pro Farmer, and those are going to be watched and they're traded. So that's a significant drop for their stops in South Dakota, at least. And we'll see what they have to say by the end of the day, once they've worked through a portion of the Nebraska leg, and then of course, Ohio into Indiana. So they go South Dakota into Nebraska today, Ohio into Indiana tomorrow, or today as well. And then tomorrow they work their way into Iowa, Illinois, and actually will be going to see what their report looks like on Wednesday evening here locally. So it's a big deal, and it does get traded heavily every year.
So the Commitment of Traders report came out last Friday afternoon, I would imagine. Are they still heavily short like they were before, or have they lightened up on that?
They've lightened up from the peak, no doubt, but they are still very historically heavily short. The funds are still in the massive short position. Both corn and soybeans had almost no change in the wheat week over week. And so, yeah, they're still clinging to this short position. And I don't know if whether the third week of August is going to be enough to spook them out of that, or if it's going to be yield reports as the combines move. I don't know what it's going to be, but they did liquidate from the peak of their short to where they are as of last Tuesday. They had liquidated 100,000 of their corn contracts and moved the market zero. And that's because that short liquidation is being met with farmer selling along the way.
Okay. So that can't go on forever, though, right?
That's right. Yeah. Eventually, one loses faith in the other, and the market's going to pick a direction. And we just hope that farmers can hold out and the funds decide, okay, enough's enough, and take their money.
Well, and I keep going back to the old axiom that the market won't rally until the commercials own the majority of the crop.
Mhm.
Are we not there yet?
From what I've been told and what I can tell, we are there as far as old crop goes, but we've got a new crop right around the corner, and they certainly aren't anywhere close on the new crop.
Okay, let's flip the page and let's take a look then at the livestock trade. Kind of a mixed affair going on over there. And for a change, the spotlight goes to the hog trade. That was kind of interesting to start out the new week. What's with that?
Well, it stems back to Friday morning. Kamala Harris was making comments about price fixing and corporate profits and things of this nature, and trying to control food prices at the retail level, and how retailers have been gouging over the last year or two. And there was a lot of chatter going on. Luckily, I was out in a cornfield and didn't hear what was being said exactly, but um, the punchline of it all was, if the government's going to have control over capitalistic markets, then who's going to enter those markets, and what's the ebb and flow of supply and demand look like, and what does that mean for long-term pricing? So it spooked the market. That obviously hit the beef, or as it were, the cattle complex, really hard on Friday. You traded over $4 lower in most of your live cattle contracts, $6 lower in several of your feeder cattle contracts before rebounding a little to the close. But this all bodes well for pork in the end, if that's going to be the case, because it's such a cheaper alternative to beef in the protein sector. So I think that's bolstered prices a little bit. Cash trade wasn't confirmed today because there were such light numbers, but the Packers don't seem to be having any trouble getting their numbers. So kind of a tug of war effect going on right now between the fundamental influences, and we'll just have to see how it goes.
And yet the Dow had another big update.
Yeah, stock market made a nice move. The Nasdaq was on fire today. It wasn't a 300 or 400 point move like we have seen in recent days, but that's a good thing. If we can move methodically higher, that's the sign of a strong market. And probably the biggest thing this week to keep an eye out is Jay Powell talking from Jackson Hole later in the week, and what they're going to do. Not necessarily in September. I think it's a foregone conclusion that September is going to be a quarter point rate decline. But what his chatter is regarding future rate cuts and the potential of those and the size of those, and that's what the trade's going to focus on later in the week.
And amazingly, let me check here as we're recording this, even with all the high tension in the Middle East, crude oil just washed out again on Monday.
Yeah.
I'm just amazed at that market.
Yeah, this has been amazing to me since it all started. When the tensions in the Middle East reach a point of boiling and crude oil doesn't react, it never ceases to amaze me, because this is the first time we've ever had significant turmoil in that region throughout the history of the market trading, at least, where crude oil hasn't been reactive, not in a real way. And this continues to be the case. And there's even been direct threats to the Saudi Arabian oil fields and various things. I mean, I know you're aware of all that stuff too, Marlin, but with all that going on and just nothing, it's incredible, honestly.
I mean, given the way the energy market is right now, as of today, is that something producers should look at as maybe a golden opportunity right now?
I believe so. Yeah. Typically, my advice this time of year is, if you're covered through the fall, wait till December, because 80% of the time that's the best time to buy. Somewhere in the December to February timeframe. But I have old timers that tell me, if you buy in September, you're right 8 out of 10 years, or December, buy in December. So you can go back and dissect charts and try to buy in seasonal patterns and stuff like that. But ultimately, I think, given the potential increases in crude and product pricing over the next 6 months due to escalations in war tensions in that region, that I think this is a golden opportunity, at least through spring. But I don't know that I would get overly aggressive beyond that, not knowing how this is going to play out.
And natural gas is only about 35 cents from its low of the year too.
Yeah, and can't get any traction. But that also goes along with mild seasons. We didn't have the extreme heat for a lot of the summer, although we did have it in pockets. And I don't want people yelling at me from Kansas that had 115 degree ambient temperatures, but there was definite struggles along the way. But for the most part, the bulk of the regions have not been extreme this year. And by all accounts, fall is not going to be any exception right now.
All right. Well, Eric, thank you very much for the report. And thanks for all the updates on the trip through the Central Plains. Very
No problem.
interesting stuff. We'll see how it dovetails with the rest of the Pro Farmer Crop Tour going on this particular week further east, and we'll see what happens. We'll maybe get some more updates here in the next couple of days. Eric Relph with us from Comstock Investments. Thanks again for joining us. For producer Brian Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bohling. And we'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock channel. Thanks for joining us on our Comstock YouTube channel. Don't forget you can also find us on Facebook and TikTok as well. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.